The morning alarms on research station Kepler 442 had always been gentle chimes, designed to wake the scientists without startling them from their deep space dreams. But today, the alarms screamed like banshees, red lights flashing across every corridor as Dr. Sarah Chen rushed from her quarters toward the main observatory deck. "What's happening?" she called to Dr. Marcus Webb, who was already hunched over the main sensor array, his face pale in the crimson emergency lighting. "We're picking up massive energy signatures," Marcus replied, his voice tight with tension. "Multiple ships, Sarah. Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands. They're not using any propulsion system we've ever seen." Sarah's heart hammered as she reached the observation window. The darkness of space, usually peaceful and empty around their remote research station, now blazed with lights. Ships of impossible size moved through the void, their hulls gleaming silver and gold under the light of distant stars. But these weren't the elegant, curved vessels she might have imagined alien craft to be. These ships looked like floating cities, bristling with weapons that crackled with unknown energy. "Are they heading toward Earth?" Sarah whispered. Marcus shook his head grimly. "No, they're not alone out there. Look at the other side of the system." Sarah pressed her face against the reinforced glass and gasped. On the opposite side of their solar observation point, another fleet had appeared. These ships were darker, their hulls black as the space between stars, but they pulsed with veins of blue light that ran along their surfaces like blood through arteries. "Two fleets," she breathed. "They're going to fight." For the next 6 hours, Sarah and Marcus watched in horrified fascination as the two alien armadas positioned themselves for battle. The station's computers worked frantically to translate the communications they intercepted, fragments of language unlike anything in Earth's databases. The Golden Fleet called themselves the Hegemony. Their ships moved with military precision, each vessel taking its position in perfect formation. The translations revealed their purpose. They were an empire that had conquered 12 star systems, enslaving or destroying any species that refused to submit to their rule. The Dark Fleet belonged to the Coalition of Free Worlds, a desperate alliance of species fighting to remain independent. Their communications spoke of last stands and final hopes, of worlds already burned and populations scattered to the stellar winds. When the battle began, it was beyond anything humans had ever imagined war could be. Beams of pure energy lanced across space, each shot carrying enough power to crack a moon. The Golden Hegemony ships fired in perfect synchronization, their weapons designed to overwhelm enemy shields through sheer concentrated force. But the coalition ships moved like dancers, weaving between the attacks while returning fire with weapons that seemed to bend space itself. Sarah watched a coalition ship die, its hull cracking open like an egg to spill atmosphere and debris into the void. She saw a hegemony vessel torn in half by some impossible weapon that made its atoms forget how to hold together. The battle raged for 18 hours, and when it finally ended, both fleets were reduced to burning wreckage and the occasional surviving ship limping away into hyperspace. "We have to warn Earth," Marcus said finally, his voice hoarse from hours of silent observation. But as they prepared their urgent transmission to the Sol system, new contacts appeared on their sensors. A third fleet, smaller than the others, but moving with purpose toward the debris field. Sarah and Marcus held their breath as these new ships began salvaging technology from the battlefield, their scanners analyzing every piece of wreckage. "They're studying the weapons," Sarah realized, "learning from both sides." The leader of this salvage fleet was Admiral Kresh of the Hegemony Intelligence Corps. He had been observing the battle from a safe distance, waiting for both sides to exhaust themselves. His mission was simple: gather intelligence on coalition technology and identify new systems that might harbor useful resources or strategic positions. "Admiral," his weapons officer reported, We're detecting an artificial structure in this system. A small station, apparently inhabited. Kresh studied the readings with interest. Life signs? 2 biological entities. The station appears to be a scientific research facility. Technology level is primitive, but they've been observing our battle. Interesting, Kresh mused. A previously unknown species. They've witnessed hegemony power firsthand. They might be useful as subjects for our expansion program. As the hegemony ships approached Kepler 442, Sarah and Marcus realized they were about to become humanity's first contact with an alien intelligence. Unfortunately, that intelligence had just demonstrated its willingness to engage in galactic warfare. "Sarah," Marcus said quietly, "I don't think they're coming to say hello." The lead hegemony ship was massive, easily the size of a city district. As it drew closer, smaller craft detached from its hull and approached the research station. These boarding pods moved with predatory grace, and Sarah could see weapon ports along their sides. "We need to get a message to Earth," she said, her fingers flying over the communication console. "Tell them what's coming. Tell them about the war." The transmission burst toward the Sol system just as the first hegemony boarding pod attached itself to their station's docking port. Sarah and Marcus could hear the hull vibrating as alien cutting tools began slicing through the airlock. When the hegemony soldiers finally breached the station, they found 2 humans who refused to kneel. Marcus stood protectively in front of Sarah, a plasma cutter in his hands, despite knowing it would be useless against the aliens' energy shields. The hegemony troopers were tall, humanoid creatures with gray skin and 4 arms, each ending in hands that could manipulate their advanced weapons with frightening dexterity. Their leader, a subordinate of Admiral Kresh, spoke through a translation device. "You will submit to hegemony authority. Your species will be evaluated for useful traits. Resistance will result in immediate termination." "Go to hell," Marcus replied. The trooper leader tilted his head, apparently accessing the translation for this phrase. An interesting response. "Your species shows defiance even when facing superior force. This trait may have value." Sarah stepped forward, her scientific mind working even in the face of death. "You're studying us. You want to know what humans are capable of." "All species have their uses," the trooper confirmed. "Some provide labor, some provide technology, some provide entertainment. We will determine your species' proper classification." But as the hegemony soldiers prepared to transport their prisoners to the main ship, alarms began sounding throughout their fleet. Admiral Kresh's voice crackled through their communication systems with urgent commands. "All units, prepare for immediate departure. Coalition reinforcements detected at the system's edge. We cannot be caught in extended engagement." The trooper leader looked frustrated but began withdrawing his forces. Before leaving, he addressed the 2 humans one final time. "Your world will be located. Your species will be catalogued. Prepare your people for integration into the hegemony." As the alien ships departed, Sarah and Marcus were left alone in their damaged station, staring at the ruins of the alien battlefield and the implications of what they had witnessed. "How long until our message reaches Earth?" Sarah asked. Marcus checked the calculations. "At light speed, about 4 months. But Sarah, I don't think we have 4 months." He was right. The hegemony had detected Earth's radio broadcasts from the human research station's equipment. Admiral Kresh was already plotting a course to the Sol system, expecting to find a primitive species ripe for conquest. What the hegemony didn't know was that humanity's first response to learning about a galactic war would not be to hide or surrender. The message from Kepler 442 would reach Earth's military leaders, scientists, and engineers. They would have months to prepare for the arrival of an alien invasion force, and humanity had always been very good at preparing for war. On Earth, General Patricia Hayes stood in the Pentagon's Situation Room, reading the transmission from Kepler 442 for the 5th time. Around the table sat the planet's most brilliant military minds and scientists, all trying to process the reality that humanity was no longer alone in the universe, and that their new neighbors were not friendly. Dr. Chen estimates they'll arrive in 6 months, General Hayes said finally, based on the speed their ships demonstrated when leaving the research station. 6 months to prepare for an alien invasion, muttered Dr. Robert Kim from the Department of Advanced Weapons Research. These hegemony forces, they've conquered 12 star systems. Their technology is obviously far beyond ours. But they don't know anything about us, interjected Colonel James Morrison from Strategic Planning. That's our advantage. They think we're primitive. They expect easy conquest. General Hayes nodded grimly. The question is, what can we do with 6 months that will make a difference against ships that can crack moons? The answer to that question would come from an unexpected source. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a theoretical physicist who had been quietly working on experimental weapon systems, raised her hand hesitantly. General, there's something we've been developing that might help. It's based on quantum entanglement principles, but weaponized. We call it the probability cascade effect. Explain it in terms I can understand, Doctor. Dr. Vasquez stood and activated a holographic display. Every ship, no matter how advanced, depends on countless interconnected systems working properly. Life support, navigation, weapons, shields. The PCE weapon doesn't try to overpower their technology. Instead, it introduces quantum uncertainty into their systems. It makes critical components randomly fail at the worst possible moments. You're talking about sabotaging their ships from the inside? More than that. The effect spreads through any interconnected network. If we can hit one ship in their fleet with a PCE weapon, the quantum cascade could affect their entire armada. General Hayes leaned forward. How many of these weapons can you build in 6 months? With unlimited resources and round-the-clock work, maybe 50 functional units. You have unlimited resources as of now. Whatever you need. As news of the approaching alien threat spread through Earth's governments, humanity began preparing for war with characteristic determination and ingenuity. The world's greatest minds turned their attention to military applications. Engineers designed new spacecraft based on salvage technology from the research station's scanners. Weapons manufacturers retooled their entire production lines. But perhaps most importantly, humanity's military leaders began studying the footage from the alien battle that Dr. Chen and Dr. Webb had recorded. They analyzed the tactics, the technology, and most crucially, the psychology of their future enemies. The hegemony fought like a traditional military force, relying on superior firepower and coordinated attacks. They expected their enemies to respond in kind, meeting force with force in conventional battles. They had no idea that humans had spent their entire history fighting each other, developing tactics that assumed their enemies were just as intelligent and creative as they were. Humanity had invented concepts like guerrilla warfare, psychological operations, and asymmetrical combat out of necessity. The stars had seen many species rise to challenge galactic empires. Most fell quickly when faced with overwhelming technological superiority. But the stars had never seen a species quite like humanity, one that treated impossible odds not as reasons to surrender, but as interesting tactical problems to solve. As Admiral Kresch's fleet approached the Sol system, confident in their inevitable victory, Earth's military forces put their final preparations into motion. Hidden weapon platforms took position throughout the asteroid belt. Stealth ships powered down to background radiation levels. And deep in underground bunkers, Dr. Vasquez made final adjustments to weapons that could make the impossible happen. The hegemony had conquered 12 star systems through superior technology and overwhelming force. They were about to discover that some problems couldn't be solved with bigger guns and stronger shields. They were about to learn why, in every human language, there were so many different words for revenge. Admiral Kresh stood on the command bridge of his flagship, the inevitable conquest, watching the Sol system grow larger on his tactical displays. 6 months had passed since his forces had discovered the primitive research station, and now he approached what his intelligence teams assured him would be an easy victory. "Admiral," his navigation officer reported, "we're detecting multiple artificial satellites around the third planet, primitive communication and observation devices, no military capabilities detected." Kresh nodded with satisfaction. The hegemony had faced hundreds of species in their expansion across the galaxy, and the pattern was always the same. First contact, evaluation of threat level, then either integration or elimination. This human species appeared to fall firmly into the integration category. "Launch reconnaissance probes," Kresh commanded. "I want full scans of their industrial capacity, population centers, and any military installations." The probes launched from his ship's hull, sleek silver devices designed to gather intelligence while remaining undetected. They streaked toward Earth's solar system, their advanced sensors preparing to catalog another conquest for the hegemony's ever-expanding empire. What Admiral Kresh didn't know was that humanity had been tracking his fleet since they entered the outer edges of the solar system. Hidden sensor stations, disguised as asteroids and debris, had been monitoring the alien ships for weeks. Earth's military command knew exactly where every hegemony vessel was positioned. Captain Maria Santos sat in the command center of Hidden Base Alpha, built deep within Ceres in the asteroid belt. Around her, dozens of technicians monitored the approaching alien fleet while making final preparations for humanity's first strike. "Target acquired," announced Lieutenant Commander Chen, Dr. Sarah Chen's younger brother who had joined the military immediately after hearing about his sister's encounter with the aliens. "Lead reconnaissance probe is entering our engagement zone." Captain Santos nodded grimly. "Remember, we get one chance to surprise them. After this, they'll know we're not as primitive as they think. Activate the Phantom Protocol." Throughout the asteroid belt, dozens of seemingly empty chunks of rock suddenly came alive. Hidden weapon platforms extended from camouflaged positions, their human-built targeting systems locking onto the approaching hegemony probes. But these weren't conventional weapons designed to destroy the alien scouts. Dr. Elena Vasquez had spent 6 months perfecting humanity's secret weapon, and now it was time to test it in actual combat. The probability cascade effect weapons powered up, their quantum processors calculating the precise moment to fire. The first hegemony probe was less than 1,000,000 kilometers from Earth when reality hiccuped around it. The PCE weapon didn't hit it with a beam or projectile. Instead, it introduced quantum uncertainty into the probe's navigation system at exactly the wrong moment. The probe's computer, trying to calculate its position, suddenly couldn't decide if it was facing toward Earth or away from it. The result was spectacular. The probe's engine fired in 3 different directions simultaneously, tearing the scout craft apart from the inside. On the inevitable Conquest's bridge, the probe's signal simply vanished. "Status report," Admiral Kresh demanded. "Unknown, sir. Probe 7 has stopped transmitting. No energy weapon signatures detected. No physical impacts registered. It appears to have simply stopped functioning." Kresh frowned. Equipment failures were possible, even with hegemony technology. "Launch another probe along the same vector." The second probe met the same fate, its weapon system deciding to fire on itself when the PCE effect convinced its targeting computer that it was simultaneously an enemy vessel and a friendly unit. Again, no human weapon signatures were detected by the hegemony sensors. "2 probes lost to unknown causes," the navigation officer reported, his voice now carrying a note of concern. "Sir," the communications officer interrupted, "we're receiving a transmission from the planet. It appears to be directed at our fleet." Admiral Kresh's eyes narrowed. The primitives were trying to communicate? This could be useful. "Put it through." The main screen flickered, and suddenly Kresh found himself looking at a human face. The creature was smaller than a hegemony warrior, with pale skin and sharp blue eyes. When it spoke, the translation system identified it as female. "I am General Patricia Hayes, representing the United Earth Defense Force," the human said calmly. "Admiral Kresh, you are in violation of Sol System territorial space. Withdraw your forces immediately, or we will respond with military action." Kresh almost laughed. The primitive was threatening him? "I am Admiral Kresh of the Hegemony 3rd Expeditionary Force. Your species will submit to hegemony authority. Prepare for integration into our empire. Resistance will result in the elimination of your population." General Hayes smiled, and something in that expression made Kresh suddenly uncomfortable. "Admiral, you're making a serious mistake. You've never fought humans before. You don't understand what you're dealing with. I understand that your species possesses primitive technology and no knowledge of galactic warfare," Kresh replied. "Surrender now, and some of your population will be allowed to survive as laborers." "Counter-proposal," Hayes said, her smile growing colder. "Leave our system now, and we won't have to show you why 12 previous species losing to you means absolutely nothing to us." The transmission ended, leaving Kresh staring at a blank screen. Around him, his officers waited for orders. The Admiral had faced threats from desperate species before. This was just another bluff from primitives who didn't understand their situation. "All ships, advance to attack formation. Target their largest population centers for initial bombardment. We'll break their will to resist quickly." But as the hegemony fleet moved into Earth's inner solar system, they began encountering problems that their tactical computers couldn't explain. Ships that should have maintained perfect formation started drifting out of position as their navigation systems experienced random malfunctions. Weapon targeting arrays began locking onto empty space instead of their intended targets. The PCE weapons, hidden throughout the asteroid belt, were introducing quantum uncertainty into every hegemony system they could reach. The effects were subtle at first, but they accumulated. A course correction that was off by a fraction of a degree. A shield generator that flickered for just a millisecond. A communication relay that transmitted to the wrong frequency. "Admiral," the tactical officer reported, "we're experiencing system irregularities across the fleet. Nothing critical, but multiple minor malfunctions." "Run full diagnostics," Kresh ordered. "I want to know what's causing these issues." What he couldn't know was that his ships were being systematically degraded by weapons that attacked the very concept of certainty. Human engineers had spent months studying the footage from the battle Dr. Chen had witnessed, identifying the critical systems that every advanced spaceship needed to function. The PCE weapons targeted those systems not with brute force, but with confusion. As the hegemony fleet approached Mars orbit, Admiral Kresh received another transmission from the human general. This time, she wasn't alone. Behind her stood dozens of other humans, all wearing military uniforms. "Admiral, this is your final warning," General Hayes said. "Turn around now." "You're in no position to make demands," Kresh replied. "My fleet carries enough firepower to crack your planet's crust. Your primitive weapons cannot threaten hegemony ships." "You're right," Hayes agreed. "Our weapons are primitive. But Admiral, you're thinking about this all wrong. We're not trying to destroy your ships, we're trying to make them destroy themselves." Kresh was about to respond when his weapons officer's voice cracked with panic. "Admiral, the main cannon is charging itself. I can't stop it." On the tactical display, Kresh watched in horror as his flagship's primary weapon began powering up without authorization. The massive energy cannon that could level cities was building to full charge, and its targeting system was slowly turning toward their own fleet. "Override it!" Kresh shouted. "I can't, sir. The system thinks it's responding to a direct fire order." Across the hegemony fleet, similar malfunctions were occurring. Ships found their weapons charging spontaneously, their shields dropping without warning, their engines firing in random directions. The quantum uncertainty introduced by the human weapons was cascading through their systems, turning the aliens' own technology against them. Captain Santos watched the chaos from her hidden command center, a grim smile on her face. "Dr. Vasquez, your weapons are performing beyond expectations." "The beauty of the PCE effect," Vasquez replied from her position at the main control station, "is that the more advanced their technology, the more interconnected their systems, the more ways we can make their ships malfunction. But the PCE weapons were just the beginning of humanity's surprises for the hegemony fleet. As Admiral Kresh struggled to regain control of his ships, new contacts appeared on his sensors. Human vessels were emerging from hiding spots throughout the solar system, but they weren't moving toward the alien fleet. Instead, they were moving away from Earth. "Sir," the navigation officer reported, confusion evident in his voice. "The human ships are retreating toward their outer system. They're not even armed for ship-to-ship combat." Kresh studied the tactical display, trying to understand the human strategy. Were they abandoning their homeworld? It seemed impossible. Every species the hegemony had encountered fought desperately to defend their core population centers. The answer came 5 minutes later when the retreating human ships reached predetermined positions throughout the solar system and suddenly stopped running. Instead, they turned to face the hegemony fleet and began broadcasting on every possible frequency. The message was simple, transmitted simultaneously in the hegemony's own language, mathematical concepts, and even basic pictographs. It said, "You wanted to see what humans can do. Watch." Dr. Vasquez had been working on more than just the PCE weapons during humanity's 6 months of preparation. The second part of Earth's defense strategy was based on a simple human insight. If you can't beat the enemy's technology, make their technology beat itself. The human ships that had retreated throughout the solar system weren't running away. They were moving into position to create the largest sensor network in human history. Each ship carried quantum computing arrays designed to map and analyze every electromagnetic signature in the hegemony fleet. When the network activated, it began the most audacious cyber warfare attack ever attempted. The human computers didn't try to break through hegemony security systems. Instead, they mapped the quantum signatures of every alien system and began broadcasting perfectly synchronized interference patterns. The result was devastating. The hegemony ship's computers, suddenly receiving contradictory signals from their own sensors, began making increasingly desperate attempts to resolve the conflicting data. Navigation systems couldn't determine their position. Weapons couldn't lock onto targets. Life support systems couldn't determine if they were under attack or functioning normally. "Admiral!" the engineering officer screamed over the bridge's emergency alarms. "The main reactor is shutting down. The computer thinks we're under core overload conditions." Kresh gripped his command chair as his flagship began losing power. Around him, the bridge displays flickered and died as critical systems shut down to prevent what the ship's computer believed was an imminent reactor breach. On the tactical display that was still functioning, he could see the same thing happening throughout his fleet. Ships were dropping out of formation as their engines cut out. Weapon systems were offline. Some vessels were even beginning emergency evacuation procedures as their computers became convinced that they were suffering catastrophic damage. And through it all, not a single human weapon had fired directly at a hegemony ship. "How are they doing this?" Kresh demanded. His science officer, one of the few stations still functioning, managed to provide an answer that chilled the admiral to his core. "Sir, they're using our own sensors against us. Our ships are receiving signals that perfectly mimic system failures. The computers can't tell the difference between real malfunctions and simulated ones." "Override the computers. Switch to manual control." "We can't, sir. Manual control systems are integrated with the main computers for safety reasons. The ship won't let us take manual control while it believes we're in critical danger." Admiral Kresh realized that his fleet was being systematically disabled by an enemy that understood something the hegemony had never encountered. Technology could be turned into a weakness as easily as a strength. The humans weren't just fighting the hegemony fleet. They were fighting the very concept of overwhelming technological superiority. Every advanced system that made hegemony ships powerful in normal combat was now working against them. As his flagship drifted helplessly through space, its computers convinced that taking any action would result in immediate destruction, Kresh received one final transmission from General Hayes. "Admiral," she said, her voice calm and professional, "your ships are disabled, not destroyed. Your crews are unharmed. You have one chance to leave this system with your lives. Take it." "This is impossible," Kresh whispered. "No primitive species should be capable of this level of warfare." General Hayes heard him through the open communication channel. "Admiral, there's your first mistake. You keep calling us primitive, but we've been fighting wars for thousands of years. We've been fighting each other, learning from every defeat, adapting to every enemy. You conquered 12 species that fought like you do. Traditional tactics. Conventional strategies. You've never fought a species that sees an impossible situation as an interesting challenge." Kresh's tactical officer managed to restore partial sensors long enough to show him something that made his blood run cold. The human ships throughout the solar system hadn't just been creating interference patterns. They had been studying every aspect of hegemony technology, downloading and analyzing data from every system they had confused. "Sir," the tactical officer reported, his voice barely above a whisper, "they're not just jamming our systems. They're learning how they work. They're reverse engineering our technology in real time." The implications hit Admiral Kresh like a physical blow. This wasn't just a military defeat. The humans were stealing hegemony technology while simultaneously proving that they could turn it into a weakness. They were demonstrating that they could outthink and outfight an empire that had conquered 12 star systems. And they were doing it without destroying a single alien ship, sending a clear message. They could have eliminated the entire hegemony fleet if they had chosen to. This was mercy, not inability. As his ships began slowly recovering basic functions, their computers finally convinced that the imaginary crisis had passed. Admiral Kresh faced the most difficult decision of his military career. The hegemony had never retreated from a primitive species, but the hegemony had also never encountered a species that could turn their own superiority against them. General Hayes's voice came through the communication system one last time. "Admiral, you have 30 minutes to begin your withdrawal from this system. After that, we stop being polite." Kresh looked around his bridge at officers who were staring at him with barely concealed terror. They had just witnessed their mighty fleet disabled by an enemy using weapons they couldn't even detect, tactics they didn't understand, and strategies that turned hegemony's strength into weakness. The Admiral opened a fleet-wide communication channel. "All ships, begin withdrawal to safe distance. Prepare for emergency hyperspace jump." As the hegemony fleet limped away from Earth's solar system, Admiral Kresh tried to process what had just happened. In 6 months, this human species had gone from primitive observation posts to defeating a hegemony expeditionary force without firing a single conventional weapon. But what terrified him most was the realization that the humans had been holding back. They had demonstrated the ability to completely disable his fleet, but they had chosen not to destroy it. The message was clear. This was what humanity could do when they were being merciful. Kresh shuddered to think what they might be capable of when they decided to stop being nice. 3 months after Admiral Kresh's humiliating retreat from the Sol system, the news of humanity's existence had spread throughout the galaxy like wildfire through dry grass. In the highest chambers of the Hegemony Central Command, Supreme Admiral Vorthon paced before a holographic display showing the human solar system. Explain to me again, Vorthan said, his voice carrying the cold fury of absolute authority, how a primitive species defeated an entire expeditionary force without destroying a single ship. Admiral Kresh stood at attention, his military bearing unable to completely hide the psychological wounds from his encounter with humanity. Supreme Admiral, they used our own technology against us. They turned our ships into prisons, our computers into enemies. They demonstrated capabilities that our analysis teams still cannot fully understand. And you retreated. I preserved the fleet and gathered intelligence on a completely unknown form of warfare. Supreme Admiral, these humans are unlike any species we have encountered. They don't fight to win battles. They fight to break the enemy's will to continue fighting. Supreme Admiral Vorthan studied the tactical reports from Kresh's encounter for the 100th time. The humans had disabled a hegemony fleet using weapons that barely registered on sensors. They had demonstrated mercy when they could have chosen destruction, and most disturbing of all, they had captured complete technical specifications of hegemony technology. What is the status of our expansion campaigns? Vorthan asked. His chief intelligence officer stepped forward. Supreme Admiral, we're seeing unprecedented resistance from coalition forces across all fronts. They seem to have access to new tactical information and strategies that counter our traditional approaches. Our intelligence suggests that someone is sharing advanced military analysis with them. Vorthan's eyes narrowed. The humans? It's possible, sir. The Coalition's new tactics show the same characteristics that Admiral Kresh reported from his encounter. They're turning our strengths into weaknesses, using our own doctrine against us. What Supreme Admiral Vorthan didn't know was that his suspicions were absolutely correct. In the months following the hegemony's retreat from Earth, humanity had made a decision that would reshape the galactic war forever. General Hayes stood in the newly constructed Strategic Command Center deep beneath the Colorado Mountains. Around her, the brightest minds from every nation on Earth worked alongside the most advanced computers humanity had ever built. But they weren't planning Earth's defenses anymore. They were planning something far more ambitious. Status report, General Hayes said to Dr. Elena Vasquez, who now held the title of Director of Applied Quantum Warfare. The analysis of hegemony technology is complete, Vasquez replied. We've identified 17 critical vulnerabilities in their ship designs, 23 weaknesses in their command structure, and 41 tactical patterns that we can exploit. More importantly, we've developed countermeasures for their weapons that we can share with coalition forces. General Hayes nodded, then turned to the main display where Admiral Thompson, commander of Earth's first interstellar fleet, waited for orders. Admiral, what's the status of our new ships? All 30 vessels are ready for deployment, General. The new drives based on modified hegemony technology allow us to reach any coalition system under attack within days rather than months. Our crews are trained and eager. General Hayes took a deep breath. The decision before her would commit humanity to a galactic war they had no obligation to join. Earth was safe. The hegemony had learned that attacking the Sol system was too costly. Humanity could remain neutral, protected by their demonstrated ability to defend themselves. But that wasn't the human way. Dr. Chen, Hayes called to Sarah Chen, who had returned from the Kepler station and now served as Earth's chief xenobiologist. What's your assessment of the coalition species? Sarah stepped forward, her face serious. General, I've analyzed all the intelligence we've gathered about the war. The coalition represents 47 different species fighting for their freedom. They're not conquerors like the hegemony. They're families, civilizations, entire worlds just trying to survive. Some of them are down to their last few thousand members. And if we don't intervene? The hegemony will win within 2 years. 47 species will be enslaved or extinct. The galaxy will belong to an empire that believes conquest is the natural order of things. General Hayes looked around the command center at the faces of her staff. Scientists, engineers, military officers, all of them aware of what she was about to decide. "Gentlemen, ladies," she said finally, "we didn't ask to become involved in this war, but we've learned that sometimes the right thing to do is the hard thing to do. Operation Starfall is approved. Admiral Thompson, deploy the fleet." The first the galaxy knew of humanity's entry into the galactic war was when a hegemony attack fleet besieging the coalition world of Xerion suddenly found themselves completely unable to target the planet's surface. Every time they tried to fire their orbital bombardment weapons, the targeting computers locked onto empty space. Every time they attempted to deploy ground forces, the landing craft forgot how to navigate to the planet's surface. The hegemony fleet commander, Admiral Thex, watched in growing panic as his ships began experiencing the same systematic failures that Admiral Kresh had reported from the Sol system. But this time, the source wasn't mysterious signals from hidden human positions. This time, 30 human ships had dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system and announced their presence with a simple message. "Hegemony forces, you are ordered to withdraw from coalition space. This is your only warning." Admiral Thex had read the classified reports from the Sol incident. He knew what these strange alien ships were capable of, but he also knew that retreating from another primitive species would end his career and possibly his life. "All ships target the human vessels," Thex ordered. "Show them what happens when primitives interfere with hegemony operations." It was the last order Admiral Thex would ever give. The human ships didn't return fire in any conventional sense. Instead, they activated weapon systems that the hegemony sensors couldn't even detect. Reality seemed to hiccup around the hegemony fleet as quantum uncertainty cascaded through every ship simultaneously. But humanity had learned from their encounter with Admiral Kresh's fleet. This time they weren't trying to disable the enemy ships. This time, they were playing for keeps. The hegemony vessel's computers became convinced that they were under attack by their own fleet. Weapon systems activated and began firing on sister ships. Navigation computers decided that up was down and left was right, sending vessels tumbling out of formation. Life support systems shut down as their monitoring equipment reported atmospheric toxicity that existed only in quantum probability. Within 30 minutes, the entire hegemony attack fleet was either destroyed by their own weapons or drifting helplessly as their crews evacuated to escape pods. The humans hadn't fired a single shot, but they had eliminated 47 enemy vessels through the simple expedient of making those vessels destroy themselves. The coalition forces on Xerion watched in amazement as their attackers simply vanished, leaving only debris and the 30 human ships maintaining position above their planet. Admiral Thompson opened communication channels to the Xerion planetary government. "This is Admiral Thompson of the United Earth Defense Force. Your world is secure. The hegemony threat has been neutralized." The response came from High Commander Zelth, leader of the Xerion Defense Forces. "Unknown vessels, we don't understand." "How did you destroy an entire hegemony fleet without any visible weapons fire?" "Commander," Admiral Thompson replied, "we didn't destroy them. We convinced them to destroy themselves. There's a difference." News of the Xerion engagement spread through coalition space faster than any ship could travel. Within days, every coalition world knew that a new species had entered the war, one that could defeat hegemony fleets without apparent effort. But the Xerion battle was just the beginning. Over the following months, human task forces appeared throughout coalition space, wherever hegemony attacks were in progress. Each engagement followed the same pattern: arrival, warning, then systematic destruction of hegemony forces through their own weapons and systems. The humans never targeted hegemony colonies or non-military installations. They never pursued retreating forces beyond coalition borders, but any hegemony fleet that threatened a coalition world simply ceased to exist as an effective fighting force. Supreme Admiral Vorthon found himself facing a crisis unlike any in hegemony history. His fleets were being systematically eliminated by an enemy that fought in ways his military doctrine couldn't address. Worse, the coalition species were beginning to adopt human tactical principles, turning hegemony advantages into liabilities on every front. "How many fleets have we lost?" Vorthon asked his intelligence chief. 17 complete battle groups, Supreme Admiral. 38 additional fleets have suffered significant casualties. Our expansion has stopped on all fronts. And this human homeworld? Can we threaten it to force them to stop interfering? Sir, Admiral Kresch's reports indicate that attacking their home system would result in the total loss of any fleet we send. Their defenses are beyond our current capabilities to overcome. Vorthon stared at the galactic map showing hegemony territory. For the first time in his empire's history, their borders were shrinking instead of expanding. Coalition forces, emboldened by human support and armed with human tactics, were actually reclaiming worlds that had been conquered decades ago. What do our analysts say about these human capabilities? Supreme Admiral, our best assessment is that they represent a completely different approach to warfare. Where we use superior technology and overwhelming force, they use superior strategy and psychological warfare. They don't just defeat our fleets. They break our crew's confidence in their own equipment. And their numbers? How many ships can they deploy? Unknown, sir. But based on engagement reports, we estimate they have no more than 100 vessels capable of interstellar combat. They're achieving these results with a force barely 1/10 the size of a single hegemony battle fleet. The implications terrified Vorthon more than a massive enemy armada would have. If humans could achieve these results with 100 ships, what could they accomplish if they chose to build 1,000? 10,000? The answer to that question came 6 months after humanity's entry into the Galactic War, when Admiral Thompson received new orders from Earth. "Admiral," General Hayes's voice crackled through the quantum communication array, "you are authorized to begin Phase 2 operations. The hegemony homeworld is now a legitimate military target." Admiral Thompson studied the tactical display showing the heart of hegemony space. The capital world of Hegemon Prime was protected by the largest fleet in galactic history. Over 10,000 vessels surrounding the planet in multiple defensive shells. "General, my task force has been expanded to 50 ships. Even with our capabilities, those odds seem challenging." "Admiral," General Hayes replied, "you're still thinking in terms of ship-to-ship combat. Remember what Dr. Vasquez taught us. The bigger and more complex their fleet, the more ways we can make it malfunction. You're not attacking 10,000 ships. You're attacking one massively interconnected system that happens to be spread across 10,000 hulls." 3 days later, the largest fleet in hegemony history found itself under attack by weapons they couldn't see, couldn't understand, and couldn't fight. The 50 human ships that dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Hegemon Prime's system didn't try to fight their way through the defensive fleet. Instead, they attacked the very concept that such a fleet could exist. Dr. Vasquez had spent months developing the Cascade Network Disruption System, a weapon that targeted the quantum communications linking the hegemony fleet. Instead of destroying those communications, the system introduced systematic errors that propagated throughout the entire network. The result was chaos beyond anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Ships began receiving conflicting orders from multiple sources. Fleet commanders found themselves commanding vessels that their computers insisted belonged to different fleets entirely. Navigation systems became convinced that they were in completely different star systems. As the quantum cascade spread through their communications network, the hegemony fleet began to consume itself. Ships fired on vessels they identified as enemies, even though those vessels were part of their own defensive force. Entire squadrons broke formation and began heading for random coordinates, their navigation computers convinced they had received legitimate orders. Supreme Admiral Vorthan watched from his command bunker on Hegemon Prime as the most powerful military force in galactic history tore itself apart. Ships that had never seen combat were destroying each other based on false identification signals. Crews were abandoning vessels that they believed were about to explode, even though those ships were completely undamaged. "How are they doing this?" Vorthan screamed at his technical staff. "Sir, they're not attacking our ships," his chief engineer replied, his voice shaking. "They're attacking the idea that our ships can work together. They're making our fleet forget how to be a fleet." Within 6 hours, the defensive fleet of Hegemon Prime had been reduced to scattered wreckage and individual ships fleeing in all directions. The human task force approached the planet unopposed, their weapons having eliminated the largest military formation in galactic history without firing a single conventional shot. Admiral Thompson opened communication channels to the planetary surface. "Supreme Admiral Vorthan, this is Admiral Thompson of the United Earth Defense Force. Your fleet is neutralized. Your planet is defenseless. Surrender now, and we will accept your offer to negotiate a permanent ceasefire." Vorthan's response came through the communication system, his voice carrying the weight of absolute defeat. "Admiral Thompson, the hegemony formally requests terms for ending hostilities with the Coalition and your species." "Supreme Admiral, our terms are simple. Immediate withdrawal from all Coalition worlds, recognition of Coalition independence, and establishment of a galactic neutral zone to prevent future conflicts." "And if we refuse?" Admiral Thompson's reply sent chills through every hegemony leader listening to the transmission. "Supreme Admiral, what you witnessed today was our demonstration of what humans can do when we're being merciful. Our next demonstration will be what we can do when we're not." The message was clear. Humanity had proven they could eliminate the hegemony's military forces without targeting civilian populations, but if the war continued, that restraint might not continue. 3 weeks later, Supreme Admiral Vorthan signed the Treaty of Sol aboard Admiral Thompson's flagship in Earth orbit. The hegemony's expansion was permanently ended. Coalition worlds were recognized as independent, and a new galactic order began, one where conquest was no longer the path to power. But perhaps most importantly, the galaxy learned why the stars themselves seemed to tremble when humanity entered the war. It wasn't because humans had the most powerful weapons or the largest fleets. It was because humans fought wars in ways that made such things irrelevant. They didn't just defeat enemies. They convinced enemies to defeat themselves. They didn't conquer through strength. They won through intelligence, creativity, and the uniquely human understanding that every problem, no matter how impossible, was just a puzzle waiting to be solved. The hegemony had conquered 12 star systems by being stronger than their enemies. Humanity had ended a galactic war by being smarter than everyone else. And across the galaxy, species that had spent decades fearing the sound of hegemony war fleets now found themselves fearing something else entirely. The quiet arrival of human ships, and the knowledge that when humans decided to solve a problem, that problem stayed solved. The stars no longer trembled from the engines of conquest fleets. They trembled from the realization that the galaxy's newest species had just demonstrated that intelligence would always triumph over force, and creativity would always defeat conventional thinking. The war was over. Humanity had won it in less than a year, and everyone, from the smallest coalition world to the mightiest hegemony fortress, understood that the galaxy would never be the same again.